Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in a Year, 2021. This is day 186 with an explanation. If you've been trying to play catch up, you will not have even noticed the mistake that was made. But those of you who have been working through this and trying to stay up, you may have noticed that somehow day 186 got missed. And to be honest, I don't know how it did. What ended up happening is that day 185 got labeled as day 185 and another one is day 186. And so we never did this recording. So I do apologize. I'm just going back to do catch up, and we had to do a relabeling of videos that followed it and so on. But here we are. These things happen, right? So as we work through this, we're picking up here in the 2 Kings chapter 2. We're dealing with the boy king. He became king when he was around 6 or 7, very young, and he was a great king because of Joash, and that's what we read here. Joash always did what was, sorry, not because of Joash, but because of Jehoiada. Jehoash always did what was right in the Lord's eyes because the priest Jehoiada was his teacher. And Jehoiada had actually married into the royal family. He was also the head priest. He came against the queen mother when she took over and tried to be queen, and they hid away Jehoash so that he could be crowned king later. And then the queen mother was executed under Jehoiada's orders. But this young king did well as long as he had the wise counsel. And his concern, when he started flexing his muscle as a young king, as he got older, he looked at the temple and saw that it wasn't being kept up. And that became his thing. That became his project. That's how he learned some independence from Jehoiada. And we see here in verses 4 and 5, Joash said to the priests, collect all the currently available money relating to holy things that is brought to the temples. Some is money people pay to redeem persons according to their assessed value. Collect all the money brought to the Lord's temple that people offer voluntarily. The priests should take the money from their donors and use it to repair the temple wherever such a need for repair is discovered. But you have to understand here, the priests, their pet project was actually a replacement of all the holy items that had been stolen by other kingdoms that had come in and conquered them. So all the expensive holy items of the temple had been stolen. So the priests, with every opportunity they could, would use the money coming in to make these items. And so the money was not going to where the king had ordered it to go, is what we found out. Now they had agreed, the priests agreed that they wouldn't take any more money from the people, nor be responsible for temple repairs. So this is where the king had called them in and for accountability, because what he had ordered wasn't being done. So they agreed that they're going to be hands off of this. They're not going to be responsible. They're going to hire on people who are going to be responsible. The money is going to go directly to those people. And here we find a strange thing in this time. Trust, I would have thought would have been at a premium, but look at this. In verse 15, there was no need to check on those who received the money and paid the workers because they acted honestly. Wow. That's more than what happened with the priests who didn't follow through on what the king had said. The workers, at least, were acting honestly in these things. Now we come into some of the bad stuff. Jehoiada has died. Jehoash is on his own as king, and he is confronted by the situation, and he doesn't consult the Lord at all. We see in verse 18, Judah's king Jehoash took all the holy objects. I mean, the priests were just replacing these things. Took all the holy objects that had been dedicated by his ancestors, Judah's kings Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahijah, along with the holy objects he himself had dedicated, as well as all the gold in the treasure rooms of the Lord's temple and the palace. And he sent them to Aram's king Hazael. Hazael then pulled back from Jerusalem. What a disappointment compared to other kings of the past who were also in these similar situations, called out to the Lord, and the Lord rescued them. But it really speaks to the condition of this king. And so what we find is it got really bad for Judah under Jehoash. So Jehoash's officials plotted a conspiracy and killed him at Beth Milo on the road that goes down to Selah. Now, in Israel, they get away with assassinations, but we will see in coming days that it did not pay to be an assassin in Judah at all. So then we pick it up in chapter 13. And we have here Jehoahaz, Jehu's son, is now king of Israel. So he did what was evil in the Lord's eyes. Surprise there, right? There wasn't one king that didn't. He walked in the sins that Jeroboam, Nebat's son, had caused Israel to commit. He didn't deviate from them. So the Lord was angry at Israel. Time after time, God handed them over to Aram's king, Hazael, and to Hazael's son, Ben-Hadad. But here is something interesting, though, because we just had, the king of Judah not seeking the Lord out on something. And here we have the king of Israel seeking the Lord. But Jehoahaz sought the Lord's presence, and the Lord listened to him because he saw how badly Aram's king was oppressing Israel. That's really turning the tables here. And we see Yahweh's response. The Lord sent Israel a savior, and they escaped from Aram's power. Then the Israelites lived peacefully at home, just as they had in the past, but they didn't deviate from the sins that Jeroboam's dynasty had caused Israel to commit. They walked in them. Moreover, a sacred pole stood in Samaria, so they went beyond what the original Jeroboam had set up. So in verse 10 to 11, here we have a switch of kingship again. Surprise, surprise. Joash becomes king and went to war with Judah. So Joash, Jehoahaz's son, became king of Israel in Samaria in the 37th year of Judah's king Jehoash. He ruled for 16 years. That's pretty long for a king in Israel. He did what was evil in the Lord's eyes. He didn't deviate from all the sins that Jeroboam, Nebat's son, had caused Israel to commit, but he walked in them. And he had that war with Israel. And then we have this situation where Elisha is dying. And there's no replacement. There was Elijah. Elijah was told to pick Elisha as a replacement, but Elisha wasn't given to pick anybody else. And it's because the role of the prophet is about to change, and we're going to have people like Isaiah, who's going to come in, and it's really Elijah and Elisha were there as a thorn in the flesh to remind the kings that God was in charge. To do the anointing, the blessing, to challenge things. But when we meet up with Isaiah is just going to be a proclaimer. He's just going to proclaim what's happening. And the Lord is going to use prophets like Isaiah to prepare people for what's coming. But here we have Elisha dying. So now Elisha became sick with the illness that would kill him. So Israel's king Joash went down to see him. Joash cried over Elisha, saying, "Oh, my father, Israel's chariots and its riders." Sound familiar? Exactly what Elisha said with Elijah. And here again, I want to point out that, in the first couple of generations, there was no Yahweh worship at all. But in the third and fourth generation, we find that there is Yahweh worship. It's just not exclusive and it's not pure as it is in Judah. But there is a Yahweh worship. So here we find the king. It's really strange, but we find the king of Israel crying over the loss of Yahweh's prophet. And so there's one last prophecy left here in verses 18 to 19. Then Elisha said, take the arrows. So Joash took them. Elisha then said to Israel's king, hit the ground with them. Joash hit the ground 3 times and stopped. The man of God became angry with him. He said, if only you had struck 5 or 6 times, you would have finished the Arameans off. As it is, you will defeat them only 3 times. And so let's just jump down to where that prophecy is fulfilled. So Aram's king Hazael died. His son Ben-Hadad succeeded him as king. Then Jehoiah's son Joash recaptured from Hazael's son Ben-Hadad those cities that Hazael had won in battle from Joash's father Jehoiahaz. Joash attacked Ben-Hadad 3 times and took back these Israelite cities. So they had those three victories. Okay, so we have the child king, Jehoash. We have here Jehoiada had him marry 2 wives, and Joash fathered sons and daughters. So this is just a little bit of details of that, the king of Judah. Just looking at that in a little more detail here. Just a few things. I had pointed out the fact that, as the young king got older, he started flexing his muscles. And so the king summoned the chief priest, Jehoiada. So it wasn't just the priest. I mean, Jehoiada is the head priest. And so he calls him, or the chief priest, and he calls him in and asks him, why haven't you required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the tax imposed by the Lord's servant Moses in the Israelite assembly for the covenant tent? So they have not been doing what they should be doing. He has not been following things through. I wonder how long Jehoiada had to look through everything to discover something that, how long the king, Joash, had to look through to find something that the priest Jehoiada was not doing right, just to flex his muscle. You can see that happening, right? So we see here in verse 10 that everyone's pleased with the king. This so pleased all the leaders and all the people that they gladly dropped their money in the box until it was full. People were just so happy to see the temple renewed and repaired. The priests were not great administrators. And so he made sure that they would. And then here in verses 15 to 16 of 2 Chronicles 24, Jehoiada grew old, and when he reached the age of 130, he died. He was buried among the kings in David's city because of his exemplary service to Israel, God and God's temple. So he was quite the priest. This is the only priest that we read of that was buried amongst the kings. So the people really, really loved him and appreciated him. And then things go bad. The head priest who has helped the king all this time is now gone. There might have been some resentment there from the young ruler, and now he wants to do things his way. So we read, after Jehoiada's death, however, the leaders of Judah came and bowed before the king, and the king listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, their ancestors' God, and worshipped sacred poles and idols. Anger came upon Judah and Jerusalem as a consequence of their sin. And though God sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord and to warn them, they refused to listen. So how much difference can one man make? A ton. So Jehoiada was holding back that wave. And now that he is gone, the tsunami hits. And then in verse 22 of chapter 24, this is just really hard to believe, considering all that he had done. King Jehoash failed to remember the loyalty that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him and murdered Jehoiada's son, who cried out as he lay dying, "May the Lord see and seek vengeance." See, that's the difference between before Christ and after Christ. When Stephen was being stoned, he cried out, "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And here we have the prophet, or the priest, the chief priest's son, who is a prophet, saying, "May the Lord see and seek vengeance." But yeah, what an awful situation. And it doesn't end well. Doesn't end well at all. I mean, without the Lord, he cannot succeed. So we read in verse 23 to 25, that spring the Aramean army marched against Jehoash. They attacked Judah and Jerusalem, destroyed all the people's leaders, and sent all the loot to the king of Damascus. Although the Aramean forces were relatively small, underline that. Although the Aramean forces were relatively small, the Lord handed over to them a very large army, because the people of Judah had abandoned the Lord, their ancestors' God. Jehoash was justly punished. The Arameans left him badly wounded, but his own officials plotted against him for murdering the son of the priest Jehoiada. So even they had a line that shouldn't, you don't cross this. And these were the ones who had convinced him to go his own way. And yet murdering the prophet, murdering the priest's son was just too much. So they killed him in his bed. He died and was buried in David's city, but not in the royal cemetery. That is really interesting, because Jehoiada is buried as a king, but the king was not buried as a king. So we're going to leave it at that, and walk in the Lord, walk with the Lord always in all things, and never go your own way. And don't assassinate any kings, because it does not end up well for people who did that. You guys be blessed today. Be encouraged. Thanks for being with us with me, and we will catch up together tomorrow. God bless.